we would need. You need something that's at 4 nines, 99.99% reliability with all these challenges. And you cut the staff of the people who are going to make sure this thing works before we make it operational, before we give it to the warfighters. You got to go back and take a look at this. But I also strongly encourage you to put together before we spend $25 billion or $175 billion or $563 billion or $1 trillion, put together a group of people to figure out if the physics will work. You could go down a road here and spend hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of the taxpayer money, get to the end, and we have a system that is not functional.
This may look like a routine budget debate, but it's actually a stress test of how power makes decisions under pressure. What's really being tested here is whether ambition can override verification when national security narratives demand speed and certainty. This raises broader questions about how institutions balance executive authority with technical reality, and whether oversight survives when it slows the process. In this video, we'll break down how a single exchange reveals the risks of committing vast public resources before the system designed to question assumptions is allowed to function.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I want to talk about the proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. There's a request to spend $25 billion in this year alone. First of all, is this system designed to intercept a full salvo attack?
Senator, it's a multi-layer system that would include different types of salvos. Obviously,
so it's not just Rogue Nation. Okay.
Well, it's meant to. Yes, it's not meant to be just one nation. It could be utilized in
against Russia or
scenarios.
China, full salvo. So what kind of reliability are you aiming to build into the system? Are we looking for something like 4 nines on intercept success? 99.99% reliability.
Obviously, you seek the highest possible. You begin with what you have and integrating those C2 networks and sensors, building up capabilities that are existing with an eye toward future capabilities that can come online as quickly as possible, not just ground-based, but space-based.
So against future capability too. So do you believe that we can build a system that can intercept all incoming threats? You think we could build that system? This is a very hard physics problem.
You would know as well as anybody, sir, how difficult this problem is, and that's why we put our best people on it. We think the American people deserve it.
So let me tell you what I think we're facing here. You're talking about hundreds of ICBMs launched simultaneously, varying trajectories, MIRVs, so multiple reentry vehicles, thousands of decoys, hypersonic glide vehicles, all at once. And considering what the future threat might be, it might even be more complicated than that. And you're proposing spending not just $25 billion, but upwards of, I think CBO estimated this at least $500 billion, other estimates, $1 trillion. I am all for having a system that would work. I am not sure that the physics can get there on this. It's incredibly complicated. So I want to get to another issue that you're facing here. How much of the staff of the Office of the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation did you cut?
After collaboration, sir, with the service departments, the Joint Staff, and others, we identified that as a place where there were redundancies and multiple additional layers that were unnecessary.
I'll tell you what you cut. You cut
so
74%.
Most of it. That's what I was going to say.
Most of it. And was your decision to cut more than half of the Pentagon's testing and evaluation office staff driven in part by concerns about the office's plan to oversee testing of Golden Dome?
The concerns were not specific to Golden Dome, sir. It was years and years of delays unnecessarily based on redundancies in the decision-making process that the services, COCOMs, and the Joint Staff, together with OSD, identified as a logjam that was not helping the process.
To get the reliability we would need, you need something that's at 4 nines, 99.99% reliability with all these challenges. And you cut the staff of the people who are going to make sure this thing works before we make it operational, before we give it to the warfighters. You got to go back and take a look at this. But I also strongly encourage you to put together before we spend $25 billion or $175 billion or $563 billion or $1 trillion, put together a group of people to figure out if the physics will work. You could go down a road here and spend hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of the taxpayer money, get to the end, and we have a system that is not functional. That very well could happen. And you're doing this just because the president, and I understand your role as the Secretary of Defense. You got to execute what the president says. But this idea, might not be fully baked. And you can get in front of it now and figure out and find out if you put the right physicists on this. And I'm not saying go to the big defense contractors. Going to scientists, and I know there's a questionable relationship with this administration and scientists, but go to some scientists, figure out what we would have to do to build a system, and then make smart decisions before we spend hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars.
Senator, we're doing that, leveraging existing technologies and not premising the project on aspirational technologies, what we can actually do, and would welcome.
Well, $25 billion in the first year is a lot of money. That's more than just figuring out if we have the ability to build a system that can handle a full salvo threat, hypersonic glide vehicles, MERS, thousands of decoys. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you, Senator Kelly. Senator Sheehy.
The moment that just unfolded in this hearing was not loud, but it was seismic. Senator Mark Kelly did not raise his voice. He did not grandstand. He did something far more dangerous to unchecked power. He asked whether reality itself would cooperate when he looked across the dais and said, almost quietly, "This is a very hard physics problem." The room shifted. Because in that sentence, the debate moved beyond politics and into the unforgiving domain of truth. What was being discussed was not a slogan or a talking point, but a proposal to spend at least $25 billion this year alone on the Golden Dome missile defense system. A system described as multi-layered, global in scope, and ambitious enough to confront the most complex threat environment imaginable. The Secretary spoke of integration of command and control networks, of ground-based and space-based layers, of building from what exists today toward future capabilities. The language was confident, familiar, almost comforting. But Senator Kelly did not allow comfort to stand unchallenged. He asked a question that cut straight through the abstraction. What reliability are you actually aiming for, not in theory, not someday, but in the real world? When pressed, the answer came back, the highest possible reliability. Numbers were mentioned, 99.99%. A figure that sounds reassuring until you remember what is at stake. When even a fraction of failure is unacceptable, when the cost of error is measured not in dollars but in consequence, those numbers stop being impressive and start becoming terrifying. Kelly, a former Navy pilot and engineer, laid out the scenario that every serious expert understands. Hundreds of incoming systems launched at once, diverging paths, multiple re-entry vehicles, decoys designed to confuse sensors, new glide technologies moving at extreme speeds, all happening simultaneously, not in isolation, but as a coordinated challenge to any defensive architecture. And then he did something that rarely happens in political hearings. He acknowledged his own desire for success. He said he wanted a system that would work. But wanting does not bend the laws of nature. That is where this exchange becomes larger than one project or one budget request. Because this was not simply about defense spending. It was about whether the United States government is willing to admit limits, whether leadership can distinguish between ambition and feasibility, whether oversight still has meaning when enormous sums of public money are on the line. The most troubling moment came not with the discussion of cost projections, though those numbers alone were staggering. Estimates ranging from hundreds of billions to well over $1 trillion. What shook the foundation of the hearing was the revelation that the office responsible for independent testing and evaluation inside the Pentagon had been dramatically reduced. The very people tasked with asking whether a system works before it is deployed had been cut back, their role diminished in the name of efficiency. Kelly drew the connection plainly. You are demanding near-perfect reliability for one of the most complex systems ever conceived, while simultaneously weakening the independent structures designed to verify that reliability. That is not streamlining. That is risk transfer. Risk moved away from decision makers and placed squarely onto outcomes. This is where the hearing exposed something deeper about modern governance, the tension between speed and scrutiny, between executive urgency and institutional caution. The Secretary spoke of bottlenecks and delays, of years lost to overlapping review processes. But history teaches that some delays exist for a reason. They are not obstacles. They are safeguards. What Kelly warned against was not malice, but momentum. The danger of moving forward simply because momentum has been established. because a directive has been issued, because turning back feels politically inconvenient. He reminded the room that executing a presidential vision does not absolve leaders of responsibility to question whether that vision is fully formed. At its core, this exchange revealed a moral question disguised as a technical one. When public money is committed on a massive scale, when national defense is invoked, when complexity is acknowledged but not fully resolved, who bears responsibility if the promise collapses under its own weight? Oversight exists to prevent regret from becoming policy. The Secretary insisted that the effort is grounded in existing technologies, not speculative dreams. That assurance matters. But it does not erase the unresolved question at the heart of Kelly's challenge. Has anyone conclusively determined that the physics will allow the result being promised, not hoped for, not marketed, but promised? This is not cynicism, it is stewardship. And it is precisely what democratic oversight is supposed to look like. The hearing closed without resolution. No final verdict, no dramatic concession, just a warning left hanging in the air. That it is possible to spend extraordinary sums, follow every procedural step, and still arrive at an endpoint where the system does not function as intended. Not because of negligence, but because reality refused to comply. That is why this moment matters, because democracy does not fail only through corruption or neglect. It also fails through unchecked optimism, through the belief that intention alone is sufficient, through the quiet erosion of independent verification in favor of speed and confidence. What Senator Kelly did in this exchange was remind the nation that leadership is not measured by how boldly one commits resources, but by how honestly one confronts uncertainty. That the most patriotic act in a hearing room is sometimes to say, we need to be sure this can actually work. The future of national security does not rest on slogans or budgets alone. It rests on whether those entrusted with power are willing to ask hard questions before irreversible decisions are made. That is the choice facing this country now, between ambition and accountability, between vision and verification, between momentum and wisdom. If you believe oversight still matters, if you believe questions should precede commitments, and if you believe the public deserves clarity before cost, support our work. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.